With the start of school, a lot of people will have to wrestle with the extra anxiety that can come with schedules, assignments, and events. A change in routine can be especially hard to manage for those with ADHD, autism, anxiety. For years, our next guest thought he was the problem. He was an adult by the time he realized he was ADHD. Then he realized there was something else standing in his way. That discovery inspired him to create the Wall of Awful. It's a framework that helps explain why it can be so hard to get started. Author, ADHD consultant Brendan Mahan joins us to share the story behind his new book, Overcoming the Wall of Awful, and how we can finally start moving forward. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I am doing well. All right. I know there are a lot of parents who are just now coming into this fold. So for clarification's sake, when we say ADHD, autism, anxiety, you can throw dyslexia and several other things in there. First of all, these are real diagnoses. You don't see it like a broken arm. But the other complicated part is there are varying degrees of how it impacts somebody's life. So it's hard to decipher for a lot of people.
Yeah, one of the ways I like to help people understand ADHD specifically, neurodiversity in general, is everybody gets sad, but not everyone has depression, right? It's the matter of how significantly these things impact your life.
Yeah.
So when it comes to ADHD, I'm forgetful, I double book myself, I sometimes have trouble getting started. That is impacting my life more significantly than, say, my wife, who is neurotypical. She might forget something once every few months. I'm forgetting things on a daily basis.
And unfortunately, when people see that, especially in a child growing up, it's like, okay, you're just lazy. We know you can do other things, but it manifests itself where people look at it in a different way, and it's confusing for a child. It was confusing for you. You grew up with undiagnosed ADHD. How did that look like for you as a child?
A lot of it looked like my teachers saying he has so much potential, right? Like, how come he doesn't do his homework and he doesn't study for tests? He's really bright. Why isn't he doing better in school? And a lot of that boiled down to I didn't have study skills, and I had this story in my head that if something was important, I would remember it. Homework was important, obviously. So if I didn't remember homework, I assumed I didn't have any because I would remember it. It was important. Turns out ADHD means I might not remember that thing that's important, so I should write it down. I should keep a record. I should have a calendar or an agenda, something like that. And I didn't really pick those skills up until I got older.
Yeah, and you say skills, those executive functioning skills. Like for my son, for example, he would do his homework when we high five him, he'd be so proud, but the next day he'd forget to turn it in. And so the other thing that was very frustrating for him was, he goes, Mom, how come in class everybody knows what to do? And the teacher says, all right, get out there. He's like, what are you talking about? Everyone just knows what to do. He goes, I just don't know what to do.
Yeah, when I taught, one of the things I would say to my students throughout the year, but especially in the beginning of the year, was if I give an instruction and you're not sure what to do, just look around and see what everyone else is doing. That's probably a hint, right? Or if you're really stuck, ask. I'm not going to get upset with you because you're not sure what page we're supposed to be on.
Yeah, all right. For you to finally get diagnosed, how much of a relief was that? Because how it impacts a child growing up, again, I said when you were looked at as lazy, you're looked at as stupid, and you know you're not. And I'm just going to go further into what happens in society when you have the collateral damage. We know that if you look at prison populations, a lot of them are undiagnosed ADHD. And it's like, what do you do when you don't get it in school? You end up dropping out. When you end up dropping out, how do you make a living? We just know there's a higher level of that in prison population. So for you to get that relief, what did that feel like?
It was a little bit of a mixed bag. I'm not going to lie, right? Because getting any kind of diagnosis can be intimidating. It can even be scary. For me, it unlocked a lot of curiosity. I sort of thought, well, if this is how my brain works, I need to learn about what this is so that I can learn about how my brain is working. That's what led me to becoming an expert in the field. But there's a little bit of intimidation mixed into that excitement and curiosity and eventual relief of now I get it. I know what will help me and what won't. When I talk about a diagnosis, I talk about how it defines our sandbox, right? We know what's going to be useful and what probably isn't going to be useful, so we can narrow our focus and come up with better strategies.
Yeah. What led you to get the diagnosis?
I was a teacher and I was barely making it. I was an English teacher. I taught sixth grade mostly. And I was struggling to stay on top of all the grading and to sort of the extra bonus stuff of contact the parents about this kid's reading test score that I didn't even deliver that reading test. Some other teacher did, but it became my job to talk to the parents about it because I was the English teacher. Those extra levels of sort of small details tended to fall through the cracks, and that eventually led me to figure out what was going on.
Yeah, and you're such an inspiration in that sense because you went straight head on into something that a lot of kids with ADHD, if they struggled through school, would run away from. You became a teacher, as you said, principal, and mental health clinician, and then ADHD executive function consultant. That's because you finally learned what that ADHD meant. Didn't mean that something's wrong with you. There's something different with you.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's just a difference, right? And ADHD gives me some stuff that other people don't have. I'm not going to call it superpowers, but
My son
I
would
get
argue
excited
with you.
about
He goes,
things.
"No, Mom, I got a superpower."
Well, I like that in theory, but it doesn't always play out that way,
It's
and
true.
it sort of discounts people who are really struggling. But I tend to be really enthusiastic about stuff, and I'm more comfortable taking risks than some other people might be. And that enthusiasm and risk taking leads me to do things like write a book, start my own business, those kinds of things.
Yeah, instead of saying it's a superpower, you're so right about that. Find the things that you are super at. There are things that everybody can
Right.
be good at. Celebrate those, but understand that those superpowers will not be realized if you don't have that executive functioning that we're talking about. All right, define the wall of awful.
Yeah, everybody's got one. So we've all had that. We all have those things that we struggle to do. It could be having a hard conversation with your spouse. It could be mowing the lawn, paying your taxes, checking your email. You name it. Any kind of anything can be a task we struggle with. The wall of awful is the emotional barrier that gets built up between us and that task after we've struggled at it a fair amount or even failed at it. There's these emotions that slow us down or repel us and keep us from engaging in that task and starting when we would want to start. That's the wall of awful. And in
Yeah.
order to get past it, we have to sort of manage those
And
emotions.
then all those negative experiences, the wall gets taller and taller and taller.
Right.
All right. So, you're right. Everybody has one. I remember for me, because I'm ADHD, and it oftentimes runs in families, right? There's a genetic component. So I'm not surprised with my son. But I remember, like, it took everything out of me, even when the money was in the bank, it took everything out of me to pay, like, a power bill. And then one day I came home and it wasn't on. And I had to learn I don't like the consequence more than putting it off. But why is it so hard to get started or do those simple tasks when those are sometimes the easiest things you can do? But what's kind of interesting is sometimes you can accomplish the big task, but it's the little ones that you just don't get to.
Yeah. Yeah, you just showed a video of my friend Jessica McCabe, and she and I have had the conversation about how we've both written books and we've both helped the ADHD community pretty significantly. But keeping our car clean, man, that's difficult, right? Like, because there's a ton of engagement and reward, like dopamine, which gets talked about in the media a fair amount. Big stuff is full of dopamine. And we want to do the things that are going to provide us with that dopamine. For ADHD, the small stuff doesn't provide enough dopamine. We often don't feel rewarded for doing a sink full of dishes or cleaning our car. That's just a task done, and we sort of look at it with no feeling of reward or yay. But writing a book, launching a podcast with 300 episodes, that kind of stuff, those bigger things will help us to feel rewarded.
Well, I felt
because
some
they're more
dopamine when
engaging
the
and
air
more
conditioner
challenging.
came back on. I'll tell you that right now. But all right, guilt versus shame. Guilt is I made a mistake. Shame, I am the mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, and that matters when we're talking about neurodiversity, because especially after someone's been diagnosed. Because if the reason I made the mistake is that I have autism or dyslexia or ADHD, how do I split that hair and say I'm not the problem, right? Like it's the ADHD that's the problem. It's not me, even though I'm the one with ADHD. It takes a little bit of work to split those things apart. I like to say that sometimes the ADHD wins, right? And I use that phrase on purpose when my ADHD wins because it means it's a new game, right? I get to pick up my sword and continue on moving forward, and hopefully I win this time.
Yeah.
instead of the ADHD.
And I tell my son, that's a great way to put it. It's like sometimes the ADHD wins, but that's when you need to know with executive functioning, when resources are in place to fill in for that thing that you lack. The other day he was driving, he goes, Mom, I forgot my phone charger. It's about to die, and I'm using Waze, and I don't know how to get home from where I am. And I said, well, hon, why don't you just push the button and tell your car to take you home? Because that's the kind of car you have. He goes, oh, no. He goes, I'm Gen Z. We don't use that. I mean, he just literally would not. I'm like, then you just get lost and you can drive the loop for the next year. Okay. But you touched on a number of things that obviously I think your whole life pretty much led to this book, but some things in particular. You went from burnout to the book. COVID brought years of personal challenges to a head.
Yeah, it did. So my boys were in 5th grade when COVID hit. I have identical twins, so I'm going to speak in plurals this whole time. And in 6th grade, I homeschooled them for the year, kind of anticipating we'd have vaccines by the time they got to 7th, which is what happened. And at the same time that we were doing homeschooling and navigating COVID, both of my sons developed obsessive compulsive disorder because the universe was like, the ADHD letters, let's do some other ones. And one of my sons in particular developed it very severely to the point that he was actually hospitalized for it. Between 7th and 8th grade, sort of into 8th grade. So he was in McLean Hospital for 3 months. And it was overwhelming, incredibly challenging period of my life. When he came home, his brother sort of fell apart because his brother was holding it together until everything was square. And then twin number 1 comes home, twin number 2 falls apart. And at the same time, my dad was navigating a cancer diagnosis. And I was really tightly squished in the sort of sandwich generation time of taking care of a lot of family stuff because I'm an entrepreneur and I make my own schedule. So a lot of those things fell to me because I could wiggle things around and make it work.
Yeah. All right. But as you said, you can handle those big things a little bit easier sometimes than those little things. Got this book written. All right. We're going to take a break. But when we come back, Brendan will share some tips on how we can all learn to climb the wall of awful. But